In this series of presentations, I will outline in a brief summary the evidence I have gathered that has pointed me to the conclusion that the claims of Emanuel Swedenborg are true and that his writings have credibility. But don't take my word for it, investigate these topics for yourself. Taken on their own, the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg can induce a great amount of skepticism. The things he describes can seem very bizarre and fantastical. However, when compared to near-death experiences, an enormous amount of similarities appear. For those unfamiliar with near-death experiences, a near-death experience, or NDE, is when an individual dies and reports an account of the afterlife or spiritual experience they had while dead after returning to life. Why, though, should we accept the near-death experience phenomenon as anything other than the chemical-induced hallucinations of a dying brain? How can we say the claims of Emanuel Swedenborg are supported by near-death experiences if we don't even know if they're valid? I argue that if one examines large quantities of near-death experiences, a common trend towards certain assertions about the nature of consciousness, God, and the afterlife arise, just as a trend line forms from thousands of points of data. The first reason that I believe they are a real and credible phenomenon stems from the medical research that has been done on near-death experiences. The International Association for Near-Death Studies published information in reference to the claim that near-death experiences are simply hallucinations. Aren't NDEs hallucinations? No. Hallucinations are usually illogical, fleeting, bizarre, and/or distorted, whereas the vast majority of NDEs are logical, orderly, clear, and comprehensible. People tend to forget their hallucinations, whereas most NDEs remain vivid for decades. Furthermore, NDEs often lead to a profound and permanent transformations in personality, attitudes, beliefs, and values, something that is never seen following hallucinations. People looking back on hallucinations typically recognize them as unreal, as fantasies, whereas people often describe their NDEs as more than real. Further, people who have experienced both hallucinations and an NDE describe them as being quite different. They also address the hypothesis that near-death experiences are induced by lack of oxygen to the brain. Aren't NDEs the result of anoxia, lack of oxygen in a dying brain? No. Physicians have compared oxygen levels of cardiac arrest survivors who did and did not have NDEs, and their findings discredit the anoxia hypothesis. In fact, in one study, the near-death experiencers had higher oxygen levels than the non-near-death experiencers. People report near-death experiences from many situations when their brains are healthy, during childbirth, in accidents, and falls. People also report classical near-death-like experiences that have occurred during conversations or while holding a dying loved one. In those cases where anoxia is involved and monitored, such as in cardiac arrest, the effects are disorientation and poor memory. The opposite is true for those patients who report near-death experiences following their cardiac arrest. Near-death experiences have not been induced through drugs or through manipulation of certain parts of the brain either. No material explanation for near-death experiences has been viable. Another reason why I find credibility in near-death experiences is that there are various common traits that are shared by countless NDEs. While no two near-death experiences are identical, there are recurring details that appear in many experiencers' testimonials. The first and most common element reported in near-death experiences is a feeling of overwhelming love and peace. An interesting thing to note is that almost all experiencers describe this feeling using the term unconditional love. Another detail that almost all experiencers describe is that the sensations and emotions are unable to convey using human vocabulary. These experiences or sensations in many ways cannot be reduced to a human understanding according to the experiencers. A second most commonly reported element of near-death experiences is that communication is not verbal, but rather communicated between the mind of the experiencer and the mind of God or other beings. This communication is often not through the use of words, but rather through concepts, imagery, or intuitions. This detail has been often described simply as telepathic communication. The most specific detail described by experiencers is what has been called the life review. The life review is most commonly described as having a person's entire life displayed before them entirely simultaneously, before God and sometimes other beings. The viewing of their life is reported as being somehow more vivid and complete than when they had been living. The life review is described to convey heavy emphasis on the actions of the experiencer and how these actions affected others. It is reported that these experiencers can feel the results of their actions from the perspective of the person affected by them. The experiencers report feeling no judgment from any of the beings present with them, only love. However, upon seeing the consequences of their own behavior, the experiencer very often feels shame, disgust, or unworthiness towards themselves. This experience is not exclusively negative, however, as the feelings and consequences of good actions are also experienced. The core purpose of the life review is essentially to convey to the experiencer the message of Jesus: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. A description of something this extensive and specific occurring so consistently and frequently certainly challenges the theory of these experiences being fabricated. Other widely reported elements include an increased state of knowledge and understanding, a sense of returning home, being shown different levels or locations within the afterlife, and being either given a choice to return to bodily life or being told they are not ready to move on. The most significant detail that is commonly reported by those who have died and returned is that they no longer fear death after their experience. Even those who were atheists at the time of their experience share this sentiment. I hope that this is a source of comfort to anyone investigating the near-death phenomenon, regardless if you find credibility in it or not. Once experiencers return to bodily life, however, they often face ridicule and rejection when they try to share their experiences to others. Experiencers also very often keep their experience a secret for years or only tell very few people. These experiences also consistently lead individuals to have a change of values, religion, employment, and other permanent lifestyle changes. It does not seem logical for individuals to fabricate these experiences, especially in the case of those who gain nothing from their claims and oftentimes lose relationships or positions of status. Also, if these experiences were fabricated for attention, why then do many experiencers keep their experience very private? While some experiences are revealed to be fabricated, these are few in comparison to the innumerable experiences that bear a great deal of resemblance between each other. The third reason I find credibility in near-death experiences is a type of experience called a veridical perception, or a veridical near-death experience. This is when an experiencer claims to witness specific events or knowledge while dead that would be impossible for them to have known, in some cases, even if they were alive. The following accounts are from the International Association for Near-Death Studies website. The case of Pam Reynolds. In order to remove a life-threatening aneurysm deep in her brain, Pam Reynolds underwent a rare surgical procedure called Operation Standstill, in which the blood is drained from the body like oil from a car, stopping all brain, heart, and organ activity. The body temperature is lowered to 60 degrees. While fully anesthetized, with sound-emitting earplugs, Pam's ordeal began. Dr. Spetzler, the surgeon, was sawing into her skull when Pam suddenly heard the saw and began to observe the surgical procedure from a vantage point over his shoulder. She also heard what the nurses said to the doctors. Upon returning to consciousness, she was able to accurately describe the unique surgical instrument used and report those statements made by the nurses. A report from a Dutch nurse. During night shift, an ambulance brings in a 44-year-old cyanotic comatose man into the coronary care unit. When we go to intubate the patient, he turns out to have dentures in his mouth. I remove these upper dentures and put them onto the crash cart. Only after more than a week do I meet with the patient, who is by now back on the cardiac ward. The moment he sees me, he says, "Oh, that nurse knows where my dentures are." I am very surprised. Then he elucidates, "You were there when I was brought into the hospital, and you took my dentures out of my mouth and put them onto that cart. It had all these bottles on it, and there was this sliding drawer underneath. And there you put my teeth." Maria's shoe. Kimberly Clark Sharp was a social worker in Harborview Hospital in Seattle when Maria was brought in unconscious from cardiac arrest. Sharp visited her the following day in a hospital room, at which point Maria described leaving her body and floating above the hospital. Desperate to prove that she had in fact left her body and was not crazy, she described seeing a worn dark blue tennis shoe on the ledge outside a window on the far side of the hospital. Not believing her but wanting to help, Sharp checked the ledge by pressing her face against the sealed windows and found a shoe that perfectly matched the details Maria had related. George Radonia. George Radonia, an atheist at the time of his experience, has one of the most noteworthy near-death experience accounts. George was hit by a car in 1976 and remained dead for 3 days until spontaneously returning to life. The following information is from George's experience as documented on neardeath.com. During this time, part of George's experience was spent moving around the hospital, and he experienced the following. I could talk to the baby. It was amazing. I could not talk to the parents, my friends, but I could talk to the little boy who had just been born. I asked him what was wrong. No words were exchanged, but I asked him maybe through telepathy what was wrong. He told me that his arm hurt, and when he told me that, I was able to see the bone was twisted and broken. George's experience continues after his revival. Yuri, this is George's Russian name, told his family about being dead. No one believed him until he began to provide details about what he saw during his travels out of body. Then they became less skeptical. His diagnosis on the baby next door did the trick. He told of visiting them that night and of their concern over their new child. He told them that he had talked to the baby and discovered that he had a green stick fracture of his arm. The parents took the child to a doctor, and he x-rayed the arm only to discover that Yuri's very long-distance diagnosis was right. The purpose of presenting these accounts is to demonstrate that there exists experiences where people see proven events that they would not have been able to without consciousness existing outside of the body. While it is possible that all of these experiences are fictitious, it does not seem plausible that the individual claiming the experience, witnesses, and already successful medical professionals with reputations to maintain all collaborate to fabricate these stories with the frequencies that they occur. I want to stress that in relation to the near-death experience phenomenon, none of this information is proof for a life after death. However, it is evidence. The evidence shows that near-death experiences have no material explanation. The evidence shows that thousands of near-death experiencers very often report identical details. Given the fact that these experiencers all come from different ages, religious and cultural backgrounds, and with no knowledge of the near-death experience phenomenon, the assertion that these experiences are all fictitious is statistically almost impossible. The evidence of the veridical experiences is probably the most compelling of all. What other explanation is there for an individual accurately recording information while dead, except for the consciousness surviving bodily death? I hope this presentation provides information that allows anyone watching to better come to a conclusion on the topic of near-death experiences. My purpose is not to tell anyone what to think, just simply to make a case for what I have concluded after logically analyzing the data. Please investigate these topics for yourself. The information I address in this presentation is only a fraction of the evidence I have come across in my years of analyzing all this information. I tried to summarize the key points to be able to fit in a video of this format. I hope it was informative and useful to you.